My husband mocked my looks and brought his mistress to the wedding. He froze when I arrived. What would you do if your husband humiliated you, then showed up at a family wedding with another woman? This is where the story begins. My husband looked at the dress I had chosen for his brother's wedding and said, "You're really wearing that," like the fabric itself had offended him. Maya Ellis Hart stood barefoot in the upstairs bedroom of their Gold Coast townhouse, one hand smoothing the side of a navy dress she had bought weeks earlier and never worn. Evening light pressed gray against the windows, turning the mirror into something colder than glass. Ethan leaned against the doorway with his jacket over one shoulder, already dressed for the rehearsal dinner, his cuff links fastened, his expression impatient. Maya did not answer immediately. She adjusted the waist once, then met his eyes in the mirror. "Daniel said formal," she said. Ethan gave a short laugh. "Formal doesn't mean funeral." The words landed softly, which somehow made them worse. He crossed the room, stopped behind her, and looked at her reflection as if evaluating a hotel lobby before a client walkthrough. "You used to care how you looked." Maya's fingers went still against the fabric. "I still care." "No, you care about projects. Schedules. Drawings. Deadlines." He glanced toward the vanity, where her makeup bag sat unopened. "You stopped trying years ago." For 12 years of marriage, she had heard smaller versions of the same judgment disguised as concern. "We're something brighter. Smile more at dinners. Let Sloan handle the camera-facing events. You're better behind the scenes." Maya had learned to let the comments pass because there was always a client problem, a design revision, a team depending on her not to make a personal disagreement everyone else's burden. But tonight, Ethan was not merely criticizing a dress. He was assigning her absence. "Maybe sit this one out," he said. "Daniel deserves wedding photos without drama." Maya turned from the mirror. "What drama?" Ethan looked away first. "You know what I mean." "No. Say it." His jaw tightened. "We've been tense. People notice. And, honestly, you don't seem comfortable at these things anymore." Maya watched him pick up his phone from the dresser. A notification flashed across the screen before he turned it face down. "Sloan, I'm downstairs." Her breathing changed, barely. "Sloan is here. She's coming to the rehearsal dinner because we have Vail people in town this weekend." As chief brand officer? As someone who understands how to represent the company. There it was again, the line Ethan had been drawing for years. Maya built the spaces. Sloan looked better standing inside them. Ethan stepped toward the hall. "I told everyone you weren't feeling well." "You told them already?" "I handled it." Maya followed him downstairs without changing. Through the front windows, she could see Ethan's black sedan waiting at the curb. A garment bag lay across the rear seat, its protective cover partly open. Champagne-colored satin showed beneath it. Sloan stood beside the passenger door in a fitted cream coat, blonde hair arranged in polished waves, one hand resting on the roof of the car like she had done this before. Ethan opened the front door and paused. "Please don't turn this into something bigger tonight." Maya looked past him toward Sloan, then toward the dining table where her printed wedding invitation still lay beneath a stack of mail. Maya Ellis Hart was written clearly beside Ethan's name. She picked it up and slipped it into her bag. "I'm not turning anything into anything," she said. Ethan frowned, but his phone buzzed again and he left. The front door closed. For a moment the townhouse was silent except for the hum of the heating system. Maya walked back upstairs, removed the navy dress, and folded it carefully across the bed instead of throwing it aside. Then she opened her work calendar. Saturday showed 2 events at the Beaumont house. Daniel Hart's wedding reception and, 3 hours earlier, a Vail Meridian investor gathering connected to the strategic transaction Ethan had been discussing for months. Under attendees, her own name remained listed beside one title Ethan had apparently forgotten to remove, design principal. By the time Maya heard the sedan pull away from the curb, Ethan had already begun replacing her in rooms she had helped build. She remained upstairs in the Gold Coast townhouse, barefoot on the bedroom rug, the navy dress folded across the bed where she had left it. For several minutes, she did nothing except listen to the house settle around her. The faint rush of traffic outside, the radiator clicking beneath the window, the silence left behind when someone had made a decision for you and expected gratitude for the convenience. Her phone lit up on the dresser. The Hart family group chat had begun filling with rehearsal dinner photographs. Maya almost ignored them. Then she saw Ethan. He stood near a floral installation at the restaurant entrance. one hand resting lightly against Sloane Mercer's back. Sloane had removed her cream coat, revealing the champagne satin dress Maya had glimpsed through the car window. In the next photograph, she was standing beside Ethan's mother and Daniel's fiancé, as though her presence required no explanation. A relative had written beneath the picture, "Beautiful couple," followed by a laughing emoji and a quick correction. "Sorry, beautiful group." Ethan had not corrected anything. Neither had Sloane. Another image appeared 10 minutes later. Ethan was holding 2 champagne glasses while Sloane leaned close enough to say something into his ear. His smile was the one Maya remembered from investor dinners years ago, when he still reached automatically for her hand beneath the table. Her chest tightened, but she did not type into the family chat. She did not call Daniel. She did not ask anyone to choose a side on the weekend of his wedding. At 8:17, Ethan called her. Maya answered from the edge of the bed. Music and restaurant noise spilled through the phone behind him. "You okay?" he asked, sounding almost pleased with himself. "Why wouldn't I be? I just wanted to check. See, tonight was easier." Maya looked at the photograph still open on her screen. "For whom?" Ethan exhaled. "Maya, please, don't turn every decision into an accusation. You brought Sloane to your brother's rehearsal dinner after telling me to stay home. She's here because Vale has people in town and we're working through the weekend. Then why is she in the family photos?" A pause. "Because she's here." The simplicity of it was deliberate. He was testing how much reality could be changed by behaving as though it had already changed. "You know what this is really about," he continued. "The company needs people who can represent where we're going. You've never wanted that side of the business. I never wanted your version of it. That's exactly my point." His voice softened into the patient tone he used when closing a difficult client. "You're happiest designing. Sloane understands brand, investors, appearances. There's nothing insulting about admitting people have different strengths." Maya looked at the folded navy dress. "You called me an embarrassment 3 hours ago. I said you seemed uncomfortable. You said I stopped trying. Because you did." Behind him, Sloane laughed at something someone said. Ethan lowered his voice. "We are not doing this tonight. Daniel deserves one weekend that isn't about us." Maya ended the call before he could redefine another sentence. Then she opened the wedding week corporate itinerary attached to her calendar. Vale Meridian's private investor gathering at the Beaumont House was still scheduled before Saturday's reception. Ethan appeared under executive leadership. Beneath his name was Sloane Mercer. Maya scrolled once, then again. Her own name remained under design principal, but she had been removed from the leadership dinner seating list and shifted to design availability if needed. No board notice had authorized any change in executive structure. Sloane was still chief brand officer. Ethan had not merely brought his mistress into a family event. He had begun using a corporate role that was not his alone to give her a place Maya had never agreed to surrender. The next morning, Ethan tried to turn Maya's absence from the rehearsal dinner into something more permanent. At 9:07, she entered the River North headquarters of Hart Ellis Hospitality Group with her coat still buttoned and the same quiet pressure behind her ribs that had followed her through the night. The studio was already bright with renderings, material boards, and half-finished models for projects that had once made her forget how late it was. Ethan was waiting in a glass conference room near the executive offices. A navy folder sat in front of the empty chair across from him. "We need to get ahead of this," he said when she walked in. Maya set her bag beside the chair, but remained standing. Ahead of what? The divorce. The company. The Vale transaction. All of it. He slid the folder toward her. The first document was a resignation from her position as creative director and executive officer. The second was a stock repurchase proposal offering to buy her 43% founder stake using the company's internal valuation from before Vale Meridian entered serious negotiations. The third was a voting proxy that would allow Ethan to exercise her shareholder votes during what the document called a transition period. Maya read slowly. Ethan watched her with the impatience of someone who believed speed itself could become leverage. "You're already miserable," he said. "Why drag this through a year of board fights and lawyers? You prepared this before telling me we were divorcing. We both know where this marriage is going." Maya turned another page. If she signed the proxy, Ethan would control his own 43% plus hers, giving him 86% of the voting power while the arrangement remained in effect. He would not technically own her shares, but he would be able to vote them as though he did. "Why do you need this?" she asked, touching the proxy. For stability. You already have 43%. And the company needs one direction right now. Your direction? Ethan leaned back. Maya, you don't want to run Hart Ellis. You never have. You want the studio. Design. Your quiet corner. I'm offering you a clean exit. At the valuation from before Veil. Because Veil hasn't closed. But you're already presenting the deal as if it has. His mouth tightened. That's how transactions work. You build confidence before closing. Maya looked at the resignation again. And Sloan. What about her? Is she becoming president? Ethan's pause lasted less than a second, but it was enough. We're discussing leadership options. Is the board discussing them? The board will understand what the business needs. The door opened, and Sloan stepped in wearing a cream blouse and tailored black trousers, carrying a tablet against her chest. She looked from Maya to the folder. Did she sign? Maya lifted her eyes. You seem very interested in my exit. Sloan did not look embarrassed. I'm interested in not letting a private situation destabilize the company. Ethan tapped the repurchase offer. Take the weekend. Talk to whoever you need to talk to. But the wedding is tomorrow, and Veil is watching everything. Maya closed the folder. Then Veil should probably see accurate information. Ethan stood. Don't make this personal. Maya almost laughed, but nothing about the moment felt funny. You brought your mistress to your brother's rehearsal dinner and handed me a resignation the next morning. She picked up the folder and slipped it into her bag. You made it personal before I walked into this room. Ethan pointed toward the documents. If you don't sign, you're choosing conflict. Maya opened the conference room door. No, I'm choosing not to sign something I haven't verified. She left without raising her voice. In the elevator, she photographed every signature page, forwarded the package to corporate counsel, and asked for written confirmation of 3 things only: the current cap table, her voting rights, and whether any board action had authorized Sloan's proposed promotion or equity. Ethan believed he had given Maya 48 hours to surrender. Maya had quietly decided to find out whether he had any right to demand it at all. The first answer came back before Maya reached the lobby. The cap table had not changed. She stopped beside the revolving doors of Hart Ellis's River North headquarters, one hand still wrapped around the strap of her bag, while corporate counsel spoke through her phone. Outside, Chicago traffic moved beneath a cold gray sky, but the noise seemed distant. You remain the registered holder of 43% of the voting shares, counsel said. Ethan remains at 43. The management and employee pool remains at 14. There is no recorded proxy, no transfer, and no resignation. Maya looked through the glass toward the elevator bank she had just left. And if I don't sign the documents he gave me? Then nothing in that package becomes effective simply because he wants it to. The distinction was simple enough that Ethan's urgency suddenly made more sense. He had not handed her paperwork because he already controlled her position. He had handed it to her because he needed her cooperation. Maya stepped outside, crossed to a quieter section of the sidewalk, and asked counsel to continue. The board records showed no resolution appointing Sloan president. Her formal title remained chief brand officer. The proposed 6% equity grant existed only as a draft compensation item. No board approval had been recorded. I don't want anyone removed, Maya said. Not today. What do you want? Preserve the governance records. Cap table, board minutes, officer appointments, the proposed equity package, the Veil transaction materials, and everything tied to the repurchase and proxy. Counsel confirmed the process. A preservation request would go through the company's corporate channels so relevant records could not be casually altered or discarded while ownership and governance questions were under review. It would not shut down Hart Ellis, block payroll, or interfere with ordinary client work. Maya wanted facts protected, not operations punished. And the wedding? Counsel asked. That's personal. Her voice stayed level. Keep it separate. Back upstairs. Ethan was behaving as though her hesitation was temporary. He told Sloan that Maya would sign once someone explained how expensive a contested divorce could become. Sloan sat across from him reviewing the Veil Meridian weekend deck, her champagne-colored rehearsal dress now replaced by a fitted cream suit. She hates public conflict, Sloan said. She'll take the money. Ethan nodded. She always chooses the company. What neither of them seemed to understand was that Maya's instinct to protect Hart Ellis had never meant she would surrender it. By early afternoon, the The corporate secretary circulated a short internal correction. Any external materials for the Veil Meridian weekend had to reflect current officer titles and current equity status. Sloane's slide was changed from incoming president to chief brand officer. The proposed 6% grant was relabeled proposed, not approved. Ethan called the secretary within minutes. Maya heard his voice through the glass wall of the adjacent conference room. Put the president title back. We're announcing it tomorrow. Has the board approved it? The secretary asked. It will. Then it can be presented as proposed after approval is scheduled. It cannot be presented as current. Ethan came out of the room and saw Maya standing near the materials library. You did this. I asked what the records said. You're using procedure to embarrass Sloane. Maya held his gaze. The record isn't embarrassing her. It's describing her job. He walked away before answering. A minute later, Maya's phone vibrated with written confirmation from counsel. Her 43% remained registered in her name. No voting proxy had been recorded, and no corporate action had altered her founder status. She read the message once, then slipped the phone into her bag. Ethan believed the weekend would pressure Maya into accepting the future he had already announced. The first official record had just confirmed that the future still required her consent. The first public consequence of Maya's quiet resistance appeared less than 24 hours before the wedding, when Sloane's new title disappeared from the Veil Meridian presentation in front of half the executive team. The Friday afternoon rehearsal was held in Hart Ellis's main presentation room, a long glass space overlooking River North, with material samples stacked along one wall and the Veil Meridian transaction deck projected across the screen. Maya sat near the far end of the table in a black tailored blouse and dark trousers, a notebook closed in front of her. She had not come to argue. She had come to watch the record catch up with the story Ethan had been telling. The title slide advanced. Ethan Hart, Chief Executive Officer. Sloane Mercer, President, Brand and Growth. Maya Ellis Hart, departing founder/design transition. Before Ethan could begin speaking, the corporate secretary interrupted from the opposite side of the room. We need to correct 2 titles before this is circulated externally. Sloane's smile faded. Ethan looked toward the screen. We already discussed this. We discussed a proposed change, the secretary replied. The board has not appointed Ms. Mercer president. Ethan lowered the remote. The board will approve it. Then the title can change after approval. A few executives shifted in their chairs. No one looked at Maya directly, which made the discomfort more obvious. The secretary continued. The equity slide also needs revision. The additional 6% award is proposed, not granted. Sloane folded her hands tighter around her tablet. That's already part of the post-transaction compensation plan. It may be part of a proposed plan. It is not current ownership. Ethan glanced toward Maya. She met his eyes without expression. This is exactly what I meant, he said. Personal conflict is now interfering with business. Maya answered quietly. Accurate records are interfering with business? Ethan ignored the question and told the team to proceed. The revised deck now identified Sloane by her actual title, Chief Brand Officer, with the 6% equity marked proposed, not approved. But Maya's line remained. Departing founder/design transition. She noticed the inconsistency immediately. The room had corrected Sloane because the board had not approved her promotion, yet Ethan was still presenting Maya's departure as though Maya herself had approved it. During the next section, he described Veil Meridian's investment as functionally complete, pending administrative closing. One of the finance executives hesitated. Should we still use that wording? Ethan's tone sharpened. Yes. We've moved beyond uncertainty. Maya wrote down the sentence. Nothing more. After the meeting, Sloane caught up with her near the elevators. You know this makes you look difficult, she said. Maya pressed the call button. What does? Forcing everyone to pretend the transition isn't happening. I'm not forcing anyone to pretend anything. Sloane stepped closer. Ethan is trying to protect the company. You're making people choose between his future and your feelings. The elevator doors opened. Maya turned before stepping inside. Then he should probably stop using my job title to solve his future. She left Sloane standing there. Back in her office, Maya reopened the wedding week investor materials she had already seen. The changes were more aggressive than the rehearsal version. A timeline showed Sloane taking over brand leadership and executive coordination immediately after the Veil closing. Maya was shown moving into limited advisory capacity. Another slide described the post-investment company as being led by Ethan and Sloan, with Maya's design responsibilities transitioned across the senior team. None of that had been approved. Worse, the plan was tied directly to the repurchase offer Ethan had handed Maya the day before, as though her shares, title, and departure were pieces of one completed sequence. The affair had humiliated her. The wedding exclusion had exposed contempt. But the deck revealed something larger. Ethan and Sloan were already presenting a corporate future built on the assumption that Maya's 43%, her executive role, and her consent would all eventually become theirs to arrange. Long before Ethan learned to call Maya invisible, he had once stood beside her in an unfinished hotel kitchen at 2 in the morning and promised he would never forget who had kept Hart Ellis alive. The memory returned while Maya sat alone in her River North office with the Wedding Week leadership deck still open on her screen. 13 years earlier, the company had been 6 employees, 1 leased studio, and a single flagship hotel contract large enough to determine whether they survived the year. 3 weeks before opening, the client discovered that the kitchen service corridor and banquet circulation plan would collide during peak events. If they failed inspection or delayed opening, Hart Ellis would absorb costs it could barely afford. Ethan spent the first hour pacing between the folding table and the construction drawings, calling contractors, blaming the original consultant, insisting the client needed reassurance. Maya took off her heels, climbed onto the edge of the drafting table, and spread the floor plans beneath a portable work light. She marked delivery routes in red pencil, banquet paths in blue, staff circulation in black. At 1:46 a.m., she found the bottleneck. At 3:12, she had redesigned the service access without sacrificing guest space. By sunrise, she was walking the revised route with the contractor, coffee cooling untouched in her hand, while Ethan prepared the presentation that would convince the client not to terminate them. The client stayed. The hotel opened. At the celebration dinner, Ethan accepted praise for seeing the solution before anyone else. Maya heard it from 3 seats away. He caught her expression afterward in the elevator. "I should have said your name," he admitted. "Yes. I was trying to keep the room confident. Confidence and credit aren't the same thing." Ethan reached for her hand. "One day, everyone will know what you built." She believed him because, back then, he still looked ashamed when he took too much. She also believed survival mattered more than correcting every room. Hart Ellis had payroll to meet. Designers depended on them. Clients were watching. So Maya learned to save the argument for home, then postpone it when another deadline arrived. 6 years later, the same pattern repeated on a larger stage when Vail Meridian hired Hart Ellis to redesign a historic hotel with severe circulation problems between guest areas, service elevators, and event spaces. The project had stalled through 2 design iterations. Maya spent a weekend inside the building with operations staff, measuring how people actually moved rather than how the original drawings assumed they moved. She reorganized the circulation plan, preserved the historic core, and avoided an expensive structural redesign. Marcus Vail attended the final walkthrough. He studied the revised plans, then asked Ethan, "Who solved the operational conflict?" Ethan smiled and nodded toward Maya. She did. For once, he said it clearly. Later, however, trade coverage described Ethan as the visionary behind the turnaround while Maya was reduced to creative support. She corrected one article, then stopped correcting the next. Silence was faster. Silence protected the firm. Silence protected a marriage she still thought was mutual underneath the imbalance. Ethan gradually began using that silence as evidence for his own version of history. He brought in the business, he shaped the brand, he carried the company, while Maya simply designed what he sold. Back in the present, she closed the wedding deck and opened the archived formation records she had reviewed only briefly the day before. The original capitalization schedule sat beside the founder agreement, dated 18 months before their wedding. Maya Ellis, 43% voting shares. Ethan Hart, 43%. Management and employee pool, 14%. At the bottom were both signatures. Ethan had once signed a document acknowledging that she was not his employee, not his accessory, and not someone he could later edit out of the company. He had simply spent years assuming her silence had rewritten what the paper still said. The records did not reveal a hidden fortune or a surprise loophole. They revealed something more damaging to Ethan's plan, that Maya's authority had been visible from the beginning, written into the company structure he had signed and later chosen to treat as optional. The morning before Daniel's wedding, Maya sat with corporate counsel in a quiet conference room at Hart Ellis headquarters while the original capitalization schedule, shareholder agreement, board records, and Vail Meridian transaction materials lay open across the table. Her 43% voting stake was still registered in her own name. Ethan's 43% remained in his. The remaining 14% belonged to the management and employee pool. Their marriage had begun 18 months after those shares were issued. Nothing about becoming Ethan's wife had converted her founder stock into something he could vote, transfer, or dispose of on her behalf. And the divorce? Maya asked. Counsel tapped the unsigned proxy Ethan had given her. Economic value may become part of settlement discussions. That is separate from present voting authority. If he already had your votes because you were married, he would not need you to sign this. Maya looked at the blank signature line. Ethan's own paperwork had exposed the weakness in his assumption. The shareholder agreement created another boundary. Certain actions that materially changed founder control required 75% voting approval. Ethan could recommend Sloan's additional 6% equity grant, negotiate around it, or include it in a proposed compensation plan. His 43% could not make it effective by itself. Formal appointment of a president also required board action. Sloan could attend investor meetings, lead branding work, and carry whatever access Ethan legitimately granted within ordinary management. But she could not become president because he had started introducing her that way. Maya felt no satisfaction hearing it. The facts were too old for that. Ethan had signed the same founder documents 14 years earlier. He had sat beside her when the structure was created precisely because neither founder wanted the other able to change control alone. Over time, he had begun calling those restrictions technicalities, as if repetition could make them disappear. The last file on the table was the Vail Meridian conditional investment package sent 8 weeks earlier. Vail's proposed 30% strategic investment was still subject to diligence and closing conditions. In the operational appendix, Maya Ellis Hart was named as the required design principal for the initial portfolio integration unless Vail Meridian consented to a replacement. No consent had been issued. Ethan had received the same package. His track comments were still attached to the review copy, detailed notes beside valuation, closing schedule, publicity rights, and projected portfolio growth. The appendix naming Maya contained no comment. Maya remembered him mentioning it over dinner and dismissing the operational language as something Marcus would work around once the deal had momentum. Sloan had access to the same transaction materials through the executive project room. She knew her president. Title was not yet final and her additional equity had not been issued. What both of them believed was that Maya would sell before those distinctions mattered. They had mistaken her silence for a waiver she had never signed. Then counsel pulled up the latest wedding week investor deck already preserved through the governance review. Maya was described as a departing founder. Sloan was presented as incoming president. The 6% grant was positioned as part of the post-investment structure. Vail's investment was described as effectively secured. None of those statements matched the current record. Ethan had already chosen to announce the future before obtaining the approvals that future required. By turning assumptions into representations, he had created the exact governance conflict that could force ownership, leadership, and the Vail transaction back into formal review. By Saturday afternoon, Maya could finally see the full shape of what Ethan and Sloan had been building around her absence. Not just a new relationship, but a new corporate story in which her ownership, her title, and even the brand she had helped create were supposed to become inconvenient details everyone would accept after the fact. She sat alone in a quiet suite at the Beaumont house, the wedding venue already humming below with florists, catering teams, musicians, and guests moving through the historic corridors. On the table in front of her were the same materials she had been reviewing all week: the unsigned voting proxy, the proposed repurchase package, the corrected leadership deck, the draft 6% equity grant, and the Vail Meridian transaction materials. Nothing new had appeared. What had changed was the pattern. Ethan needed her proxy because her 43% still mattered. He wanted the repurchase signed before the Vail investment could change the company's value. He wanted Sloan introduced as president before the board approved her. He wanted the additional equity described as part of a post-transaction structure before the required votes existed. And he wanted Maya labeled a departing founder before she had resigned from anything. The sequence was deliberate. First, create the appearance of completion. Then let the wedding, the investor gathering, the family photographs, and the veil event make the new arrangement feel socially permanent. After that, Ethan expected Maya to do what she had done for years. Avoid public conflict, protect the company, and accept whatever version of events had already been repeated enough times to sound official. Sloan understood part of the risk. Maya had watched her insist that the equity slide be labeled post-close, not current. She had seen Sloan ask whether the president title would be formally ratified after the veil event. That meant Sloan knew the authority was not fully hers yet. But she trusted Ethan's assumption that Maya would sell. In Sloan's mind, 43% was not real power if the person holding it hated confrontation. Ethan's error was more basic. He believed title, momentum, and public confidence could substitute for consent. He had spent years being the face of Hart Ellis, and somewhere along the way he had begun treating visibility as ownership. Maya looked down at the wedding invitation she had placed beside the documents. Her name was still printed there. No one had disinvited her. Ethan had simply told people she would not come. Her corporate calendar told the same story in a different language. The Vail Meridian investor gathering was scheduled 3 hours before Daniel's reception, and Maya was still listed as design principal. Marcus Vail's office had confirmed attendance through the ordinary transaction calendar, not through Ethan. A short note beneath the schedule read, "Looking forward to reviewing the integration plan with Maya on site." Maya read it once, then closed the laptop. She could have called Marcus. She could have warned the board. She could have forced the deck to be rewritten before Ethan stood in front of anyone. Instead, she chose something quieter. She would let him finish. She changed into an emerald gown with clean architectural lines, had her hair professionally styled for the first time in months, and fastened a pair of understated gold earrings. She did not look transformed. She looked rested, deliberate, visible. Downstairs, Ethan and Sloan were preparing to introduce a future that still depended on Maya's signature, Maya's votes, the board's approval, and Vail's consent. Maya picked up her invitation and headed for the ballroom. If they wanted the room to believe she had already disappeared, she would give them the chance to say it while she was standing there. Ethan was halfway through telling a circle of investors that Hart Ellis was entering a cleaner leadership era when Maya stepped into the Beaumont House ballroom, and the champagne glass in his hand stopped halfway to his mouth. She did not rush the entrance. The emerald gown moved cleanly against the warm gold light of the room, architectural rather than theatrical, its lines sharp enough to feel deliberate without looking like a costume. Her hair fell in polished waves over one shoulder, her invitation tucked inside a small clutch. For one suspended second, Ethan simply stared. Sloan followed his gaze and went still beside him in champagne satin, one hand resting against the back of Ethan's chair as though she had been placed there permanently. Maya saw the calculation in both faces, first surprise, then irritation, then the quick attempt to recover control before anyone else noticed. "Maya," Ethan said, lowering his glass. "I thought you weren't coming." "You thought wrong." She did not say more. Around them, wedding guests continued moving toward their tables, but several family members had already turned. Daniel, occupied near the front of the room, gave Maya a relieved smile from across the ballroom. She returned it and kept walking. She did not approach Ethan or Sloan. She did not ask anyone to acknowledge the obvious. She simply took the seat printed on her invitation and let their version of her absence collapse on its own. The private Vail Meridian investor session began in an adjoining salon less than an hour later. Ethan seemed to regain his confidence there. This was his terrain. Projections, valuation language, growth strategy, carefully timed certainty. Sloan stood beside the presentation screen, now introduced as incoming president, the phrase delivered with enough confidence to sound settled. Maya sat near the rear with several senior executives, saying nothing. The deck advanced to the post-investment structure. Ethan described Maya as transitioning away from executive responsibilities, and Sloan as the leader who would carry brand and integration into the next phase. "The Vail transaction is effectively secured," he said. "We're simply completing closing mechanics." Maya watched two people from Vail Meridian exchange a brief glance. Ethan either missed it or chose to. Then came the management certification required for the investor session. The document was not new. It had been part of the transaction materials already circulating. It asked current leadership to confirm that representations regarding ownership, executive roles, and material equity commitments were accurate to the best of their knowledge. Ethan signed first without hesitation. Sloane signed beneath her current name and title, then looked at him. "Should I use president?" she asked quietly. Ethan leaned toward her. "Yes, the board will ratify it." Sloane crossed out chief brand officer and wrote president beside her signature. Maya lowered her eyes to the table for a moment, not from defeat, but from recognition. They had moved beyond casual statements, family photographs, and internal assumptions. They had now attached their names to the story they wanted everyone else to accept. Ethan looked toward Maya afterward, almost daring her to interrupt. She did not. She had waited too long for truth to need theatrics. A few minutes later, Marcus Vale entered the salon with Vale Meridian Counsel and the transaction materials already opened on a tablet. He greeted Ethan, then Sloane, and finally turned directly toward Maya. "Ms. Ellis-Hart," he said, his tone formal enough to reset the room. "Before we proceed, Vale Meridian needs clarification on several discrepancies in tonight's presentation." Ethan shifted forward. Marcus did not look at him. He gestured toward the front table. "Maya, since our documents still identify you as Hart Ellis's design principal and required integration lead, would you please join us and confirm whether you have resigned, transferred your voting authority, or approved the leadership changes we were just shown?" Marcus did not ask Maya to argue with Ethan. He asked Vale Meridian Counsel to display the records already contained in the transaction file. The first document appeared on the salon screen exactly as Hart Ellis had maintained it in corporate governance. Maya Ellis-Hart, 43% of the voting shares. Ethan Hart, 43%. Management and employee pool, 14%. No transfer for Maya had been recorded. No proxy had been accepted. No resignation had taken effect. Ethan stepped toward the screen before counsel could continue. "We're in the middle of a transition," he said. "Those records don't reflect where the company is going." Vale counsel looked at him. "They reflect where the company legally is." The second document was the voting proxy Ethan had handed Maya 2 days earlier. Her signature line remained blank. Beside it, the stock repurchase proposal showed that no sale had been completed. "So Mr. Hart does not currently have authority to vote Ms. Ellis-Hart's shares," counsel said. Ethan reached for the printed certification he had signed minutes before and began scanning the language. The leadership changes were presented as expected post-transaction structure. "You certified current representations concerning ownership, executive status, and material equity commitments," counsel replied. Sloane immediately pulled the signed acknowledgement closer to herself and stared at the word president she had written beside her name. She picked up the pen again. "Then I'll correct it." Vale counsel placed a hand lightly over the page. "Please don't alter a signed certification after submission." Sloane let go of the pen. Maya stood near the front table, her clutch resting against her palm, and watched without satisfaction. The next record was Hart Ellis's current officer list. Ethan remained chief executive officer. Maya remained creative director and executive officer. Sloane remained chief brand officer. No board resolution appointing Sloane president existed. The draft 6% equity award appeared afterward, marked proposed, not approved. Ethan turned toward Maya. "You're acting like you can veto everything." Maya's voice stayed low. "I'm acting like 43% is 43%. Vale counsel then displayed the shareholder agreement both founders had signed 14 years earlier. The 75% approval threshold for actions materially affecting founder control was highlighted. Ethan's 43% could not satisfy it. Maya's 43% could not either. The structure required valid approval, not prediction. Finally, the Vale Meridian conditional investment package appeared. The transaction had not closed. Its integration appendix still named Maya as required design principal for the initial portfolio phase unless Vale consented to a replacement. No written consent existed. Marcus folded his hands on the table. "Vale Meridian has not approved a replacement, and we have not authorized anyone to represent this investment as secured." Ethan turned to one of his executives near the back. "Pull the external deck. Now, remove the president language and the closing language." Sloane stepped away from the presentation screen and slipped off the event badge that had been printed with her proposed title, holding it face down against her palm. Maya said nothing. Marcus looked to counsel. Effective immediately, place the strategic investment on governance hold. Until the discrepancies are reviewed, Mr. Hart may not represent to Vale Meridian or third parties that the transaction is closed or secured, and all transaction communications will route through the formal review channel. Ethan lowered the papers in his hand. He was still CEO. He still owned 43%. But the authority he had been using most aggressively, the ability to speak for the deal as though Vale had already agreed, was gone before the wedding reception had even begun. By 8:30 the next morning, Hart Ellis's 5-member board was seated around the River North conference table, and for the first time Ethan had to explain his promises without the wedding lights, family photographs, or investor language that had made them sound inevitable. Maya sat near the windows in a cream blouse and dark trousers, her emerald gown from the night. Before now folded away at home. The meeting opened with the same records Vale Meridian had reviewed: current ownership, current officer titles, the unapproved 6% equity proposal, the unsigned proxy, and the transaction hold. Nothing new was needed. The corporate secretary confirmed that Maya still held 43% of the voting shares. Ethan held 43%, and the employee and management pool remained at 14%. Sloane was still chief brand officer. No board action had made her president. One director asked Ethan why he had allowed the wedding week deck to describe her promotion as settled. Because we were preparing for the post-close structure, he said. And the board had not approved that structure. The independent director replied. Ethan leaned forward. Everyone knew what the direction was. Direction is not authorization. Sloane sat 2 chairs away, unusually still. When the proposed equity package came up, she looked at Ethan rather than the board. You told me the 6% was locked once Vale closed. Ethan rubbed a hand across his mouth. It was part of the plan. You said committed. I believed it would be. The difference seemed to reach her physically. She pulled the printed compensation page closer and reread the word proposed, as if the ink had changed overnight. Ethan had promised her a presidency the board had never approved, additional ownership he could not issue alone, and a future funded by an investment Vale had not closed. He had not secretly controlled those outcomes. He had simply spoken about them until she trusted him. After nearly 3 hours, the board voted to move all Vale Meridian negotiations into a temporary special committee led through the independent director and existing governance process. Ethan remained CEO and retained his 43% stake, but he could no longer speak for the transaction, negotiate closing terms, or authorize public statements about Vale without committee clearance. Sloane was removed from the Vale transaction team and instructed to use only her current chief brand officer title. The proposed 6% equity grant was withdrawn from active consideration pending completion of the governance review. This is an overreaction, Ethan said. You're damaging confidence because of a presentation. Maya finally spoke. The presentation did not create the problem. It documented it. No one answered immediately. Finance then briefed the board on the people who had nothing to do with the affair. Hundreds of employees, active hotel projects, vendor schedules, and clients now hearing rumors that Vale might walk away. Ethan glanced toward Maya, perhaps expecting her to use the moment to push him out. She did not. Instead, she asked that payroll, routine project approvals, and client delivery remain outside the special committee unless directly tied to the disputed transaction. She asked that the 14% employee and management pool remain untouched during the founder conflict. She also requested a factual internal message making clear that Hart Ellis was operating normally while Vale reviewed the transaction. No one on a project team should lose a paycheck because 2 founders failed each other personally, she said. The sentence was not aimed at Ethan, yet he looked down anyway. By the time the meeting ended, he still had his title, his shares, and his office. What he no longer had was the ability to promise Sloane Maya's votes, the board's approval, or Vale's money as though all 3 belonged to him. Maya gathered her notes and left the room knowing she could have demanded more pain. Instead, she chose to keep the company standing for the people who had never chosen any part of the betrayal. Over the next 6 weeks, Maya helped rebuild Hart Ellis around one principle she had learned too painfully to ignore. No one person's confidence should be able to outrun the structure protecting everyone else. The temporary special committee completed its review without shutting down ordinary operations, and the board approved a governance reset that separated founder conflict from the work of nearly 300 employees. Executive titles could no longer appear in investor materials, client decks, or public announcements before the corresponding board action was entered into the corporate record. Material equity proposals had to be reviewed against the company's approval thresholds before anyone described them as promised compensation. External statements about major transactions had to match their actual signed status. None of those changes gave Maya more than the 43% she already owned. They simply made it harder for Ethan to behave as though 43 meant 100. He remained CEO during the transition, but Vale Meridian negotiations stayed under the special committee until the review was complete. He could manage existing projects, oversee ordinary budgets, and run the company within his legitimate authority. He could not describe the Vale investment as closed, speak for Maya's votes, or position Sloan as part of an approved post-transaction structure without formal clearance. The restriction frustrated him because it removed the shortcut he had relied on for years: announce first, normalize second, document later. Sloan's consequences arrived more quietly. She remained chief brand officer for several weeks, while active campaigns and client relationships were reassigned through a formal transition plan. The proposed additional 6% equity grant remained withdrawn. When the governance review concluded, she negotiated an exit from executive leadership rather than remain in a diminished role under continuing scrutiny. There was no public firing, no security escort, no humiliating memo. She completed the handoff, returned company materials tied to her executive responsibilities, and left the leadership floor with only the 1% stake she had legitimately earned before the affair became entangled with corporate ambition. Maya's divorce moved separately through counsel. She rejected Ethan's original repurchase offer, but she agreed that any settlement involving the economic value of her founder interest would use an independent valuation process rather than a number chosen before the Vale transaction. Until a valid agreement changed anything, her shares and voting rights remained where they had always been. She also asked the board to preserve the 14% management and employee pool exactly as it stood, so no founder could use employee equity as leverage in settlement negotiations. The board approved the restriction during the review period. Vale Meridian resumed diligence once Hart Ellis corrected its leadership representations and demonstrated that the new governance controls were functioning. Marcus made no promises about closing. Maya asked for none. She returned to design reviews, hotel walkthroughs, materials meetings, and the kind of work Ethan had once used as proof that she belonged behind the scenes. One evening, she stood alone in the River North studio while the city lights reflected across a scale model for the next Vale project. Her phone showed a design coordination meeting scheduled for the following morning with her name listed at the top. Maya closed the laptop, slipped on her coat, and looked once at her reflection in the dark window. She was not wearing emerald silk or standing beneath wedding chandeliers. She looked tired, composed, familiar to herself. For years, Ethan had made her feel as though being visible required his approval. Now the company was steadier, the employees were protected, and the marriage was finally becoming a legal ending instead of a corporate weapon. Maya turned off the studio lights and walked toward the elevator. The only question left was whether she still needed Ethan to see her clearly, or whether freedom began the moment she stopped waiting for him to look. 10 months after Ethan told Maya she had stopped trying, she stood beneath the restored brass canopy of a Vale Meridian hotel and watched guests enter a lobby shaped by decisions no one could erase from the record anymore. The project had moved forward after diligence resumed, governance controls were implemented, and Hart Ellis stabilized enough for Vale Meridian to close its strategic investment on revised, properly documented terms. Maya remained creative director, design principal for the integration, and holder of her 43% voting stake. Ethan still owned 43% and continued as CEO, but the company no longer operated on verbal inevitability. Officer appointments were recorded before being announced. Material equity grants passed through the required approvals. Major transaction language matched actual status. The 14% employee and management pool remained intact, exactly as Maya had insisted, and the staff who had spent weeks fearing layoffs now worked under a structure that kept founder conflict away from payroll and project delivery. Sloan had completed her transition out of executive leadership months earlier. Her proposed additional 6% was never issued. She retained only the 1% equity she had legitimately earned before Ethan began promising her a future he did not control. No one held a celebration when she left. No one needed to. The silence around her departure felt more final than humiliation ever could. Maya's divorce had also reached settlement through counsel and independent valuation rather than the rushed buyout Ethan had tried to force before Vale's investment. The legal ending did not leave either founder magically stripped of ownership. It simply stopped allowing marriage to masquerade as corporate control. That afternoon, Maya moved through the hotel with the project team, checking sightlines, lighting temperatures, and the circulation path between the ballroom and service corridor. Marcus Vale joined briefly near the scale model, asked 2 precise questions about guest flow, then left her to answer the engineers. His respect still felt clean because it had never required rescue. Near the end of the reception, Maya stepped onto a quieter terrace overlooking the city and found Ethan standing alone beside the railing. He wore a dark suit and looked older in a way that had nothing to do with gray hair. "The place looks good," he said. Maya glanced back through the glass toward the lobby. "The team did good work." He nodded. "You always hated when people gave one person all the credit." She looked at him then. "I hated when the wrong person accepted it." He absorbed that without arguing. After a moment, he said, "At Daniel's wedding, I thought you came in that dress to make me regret Sloan." Maya almost smiled, not because the memory amused her, but because the question now seemed so small. "I came because I was invited." Ethan lowered his eyes. Beyond the terrace doors, one of Maya's junior designers raised a hand, waiting for her beside a revised lighting mock-up. She turned toward the door. "Maya," Ethan said. She paused. "Did you know everyone would look at you that night?" Maya looked back once. "No, I just stopped dressing myself for your approval." Then she walked inside, where the team shifted naturally to make room for her at the model. The woman Ethan had mocked for her looks had never needed a new face, a new fortune, or a new identity. When she arrived at the wedding and he froze, the truth was simply that the wife he tried to hide was still the 43% founder, the design principal, and the one person in the room whose place he had never had the authority to give away.